Hello and welcome. In this session, we are going to start with API testing in AccelQ, and we are going to start with REST APIs. This is going to be very easy and very interesting, and I will go step by step and we will learn how to create a REST API request in AccelQ, how to add the request data, how do we add the verifications. We will then run and test our APIs. We will also see how we can chain request and response, that is how we can extract a value from a response of one API and then provide it in the request of another API. We will see some examples of get, post, put and delete operations in REST APIs. So let's get started, and I will go to my AccelQ account, and here step number one is I will create a new context. So let me also write down the steps here. Step one is create a new context, and I will go to context and I can click on this plus button, or I can directly go to this plus button here and click on context. And here in the type we have a UI context and a library context. In the earlier sessions, we have seen UI context where we had our testing done on web applications, but now for our API test, we will select a library context, and you can also see this here. It is mentioned represents a stateless context comprising of general purpose non-UI based library actions. So I have to select a library context. I will also mention this here. This should be a library context, and then here I can provide the name. So let us say this is API context, and description and tags are optional. I will say save and continue. So this has created a context for us, and now we will create an action. That is step number 2. So I will say create action, and here you can go to the plus link here and select action from here, or directly from this context I can go to the actions tab and click here to create a new action. And here I will give the name of the action. Let us say this is REST API testing, and description is optional. Also you can see it has already selected the context because we have started this action from the same context, and I will say save and continue. So we have got this action, and now I can start creating the statements in this action. Now here you will see we have a API drop down here, and if I go to this drop down we have SOAP and REST options. So I can select REST from here. I will also mention this in the steps. Step number 3 will be select from the API drop down, and in this case we are going to select REST. So I will say REST, and this opens a window for REST service information where we can give the details of our REST API request. Now we have to get a API request that we want to test, that we are going to test here. So for now I will search for some public available API request or API REST API, and here is this link reqres.in. I will go here. You can take any of your existing APIs, or you can do a hands-on on this APIs. This is reqres.in, and if I go down you can see we have all these different API samples and examples with different HTTP operations. So let us say I will create a request for this list users, which is a HTTP GET, and this is what we are going to test. So I will say I will give a reference name. Now every API call has a reference name, and with this reference name you can get the request response or any property of this API. We will see this later. For example, if you want to get to the response and extract a particular value from the response, you can do that using the reference name in the statements of the action. We will see that later. So I will say here step number 4 will be add reference name, and then step number 5 is add the other request details. So I will give this a reference name get user list. You can give any name here, and then we have to give the endpoint URL. So in this case, if I click on this endpoint, we get a complete URL of this API call. I'm going to copy it from here and I will provide this here. Also, you can see we can parameterize this value, so you can get it from my action or a global parameter as well. And this will be very handy when you are doing data driven testing or when you are running your APIs on multiple environments. So for now, I'm just going to use a literal here, and I will paste the URL, and then I will select the HTTP method. In this case, it is a GET request, so I will select GET, and now we have a option for adding the headers. So you can click on add new, and you can add your headers in case there are any request headers. For example, content type is a common header. I will give the key here and the value here, and you can again parameterize the value. For now, I will just use a literal, and I will say application JSON. And also, if there are any authorization in your request, like basic auth where you have to provide a username, password, or OAuth, or any token that you have to use as authorization, you can add that in the headers section. Click on save, and now we have our request ready. So I will say here add request details like URL, HTTP methods, body, headers. All this you can do, authorization. And then step number 6 is send request. So we have an option here to send our request and check the response. So I will click on send request, and you can see we have got the response here. Here, if you see at the top, we have status, then we have headers, and then we have the response. So if I go to the status, here I am getting the status code 200, which is okay. And if you scroll over, if you just hover over here, you can see we have a add verification option. So you can directly add a verification for this status code, and I'm verifying the status code should be 200. Save this, and it is now highlighted in blue. That means this value is now being verified. And you can also see here it is showing that we have one verifications for the status. Now if I go to headers, you can see the headers we have got from the server. You can again add verification for headers and also add new headers for verification. If I now go to response, here is our response, which is shown in a outline view or a tabular format. And here again you can see I can add the verifications. For example, if I go to some particular node, I'm going to here first name, and I will click on add verification, and here I can say this is text or numeric, and I can also select the verification type. So whether it is equals, containing, contains, not contains, etc. And this value as well you can parameterize. So if you just want to parameterize this value, you can do that from here. For now, I'm just going to use the literal value and save. And let me also add the verification for last name. I will say add verification, and I'm going to add this verification for last name as well. So here I have added two verifications for the response. Also, if you see here, wherever I am going to any value and clicking, it is creating a JSON path, and we have an option to copy this JSON path. This will be very handy when you want to extract some particular value from the response for either verification purposes, or if you want to store that into a parameter so that you can use that later. For example, when we are going to chain our request and response, I will show you an example, so you can also do that. Here we have a option for filter, and you can, for example, if you have a long response and you want to filter out some particular element or node, you can do that. For example, if I say first name here and hit enter, you can see we have got all these first name here filtered out. So you can do that. We have a view here, so if you want to see that in a collapsed view or expanded view or only verifications, you can do that here. If you want to reset the verifications, we have an option to reset the verifications. Then if you want to save your response as a response body or HER format, you can do it from here. Or if you want to load a new HER file or response body, we can also do it from here. So this is how we can get our response add verifications. So I will click on save. So this was step number 7. I will write it here. Step number 7 was check response and add verifications, and then I can run this and test this. I will say run and test. So before adding more APIs and before adding more verifications, I can test it. And you can also see here, as I have saved my request, we have got two statements created in the action. The first statement is to invoke the REST API, and then the second statement is to verify all the verifications that we have added. Also, you can see this is the reference name. Get user list is the reference name for this API call. This is the URL. So just in case you want to update the URL, you can directly update it from here. So you can do that. You can directly go to the headers from here. So it will open the headers, and in case you want to do any changes here, you can do that. And here in the second API, you can see response verification. If I go here, it will take me to the verifications, and I can also make any changes from here. So here now, to test, to run and test, we have a button here for testing. So you can just go here and click on this test, and you can select some agent. Now in my case, I have a local agent running. I will select the local agent and run the test. And if I go to my local agent on my command line, here you can see it has started the compilation step, and once the compilation is done, it will run our APIs and we can get the result. So it has started the execution. So this is done now, and everything is pass, and you can see all these verifications are pass. And it is also checking first name at this particular location is George, last name is Edwards, and we also have an option to export the report as PDF, Excel, email the report, or delete a report. So if I go and check the PDF, you can see here we get some summary, total test cases passed and failed, and then we get the details of our test. So this is how you can very quickly create a API request and then run it. Now let us say I want to extract some particular value from the response and store it or verify it. I can directly go to the response verification from here, and then let's just say I want to go to this particular node, that is first name here, and I want to check this value Rachel. So if I click here, I am getting this JSON path. I will copy this JSON path and close this window, and now I will go to my action and I will say get node. As I start typing, I am getting some options here. So we have options to get node from SOAP response, get node from REST response. I will select this, get node from a REST response, and here I will copy the path that I have just copied from the response, and then I also have to say I have to give the reference name, and that is the reference name of this API get user list. I will say here reference name is get user list and hit enter, and now here I can capture this into a parameter. So I will click on capture, and I am going to create a action output. I will create a new action output and say this is first name. So you can give any name here, and here you can see now whatever will be the value at this particular JSON path will get stored into the first name parameter. Also, if you go to the parameters section here, you will find a output parameter created, and this is here first name. And now after this I can also say verify, and I will say verify text, and here we have a option verify text matches. I'm going to use this, and here I'm going to say the action parameter, that is first name, contains the value Rachel, and if it failed, I need to continue or abort. I can select continue or abort from here. So let me continue, and here the reason I have to give is I will just say first name verification. So you see I have captured the first name from this particular JSON path, and stored it into a action parameter first name, and then I'm verifying that the first name action parameter contains this value. I can also make it equals to, so I will say equals this value. I will now test this and check. So I will run this, and this should be running on my local agent. So here it is on the compilation step. Now this we can also use for chaining. Now I have got a first name, or I have got the value into the parameter first name. I can also use it into any subsequent API request, and that is exactly what I'm going to show you in the next part. So let me just complete this and I will show you how to chain our API request and response. Let me check the response now, and everything is passed, and also you can see we are successfully verifying the first name has the value Rachel. That means it is working fine. Now let us go and create a new request, and here this time I can take a post request that is for creating a user. So this is a post, and for post we also have a body or a payload that we have to add in the request. So here again I will go and click on API and say REST, and for the reference name I will say this is create user, and the endpoint I will click here to get the endpoint of this API and add it here. Method type will be post. Again, if you have any headers you can add it here. If you have any authorization you can add it in the headers. For this API we do not have any headers, so I will go next, and here I have to give the payload or the body. I will select application JSON, so you can select the type as per the type of your body, and I will copy the payload or the request body from here and paste it here. Now when I go to the outline, so you can also get it from a file, we have an option here. Now if I go to the outline you can see the body in an outline format, and here if I click on any of the value you can parameterize this as well. So let me take this name from the first name that we extracted from the earlier response. So I will say action parameter and I will select the first name. So now it should be referring the first name that we have captured. Now I will say send request. Now you can see if you use any parameters or variables it will ask us to provide a value for testing purposes. So here let us say I say ABC and say send request, and here in the response you can see we are getting the name as ABC. Although this is not the value that we have to verify, so we will change this. You can see the status here. Status is 201 for successful creation, and if I add a verification here I'll save this. So just in case you want to check the HTTP status codes, you can go here, go to Google and search for HTTP status codes. So here you can see some status code information. So 100s are for information, and then we have 200s status code for a successful response, and you can see 201 is for created, and then we also have 204 when we do a delete, that is for no content, and we will see this in a moment. And then you can see different status codes. 300s are for redirection, then we have client error, 400s, and then server error are all 500 status codes. Also here again you can see all this information, so just for reference. And now we have added our status code verification. If I go to the headers, here I can add verification for headers. I can view or verify my headers. I can also add new headers, and let me go to the response now. And now here this particular name, this should be coming from the value that we have extracted or the value that we have stored in the first name output parameter. So instead of hard coding this, I will say add verification. Here I can say text based equals to Rachel here, because I know the value stored in my output parameter is Rachel. But just in case the response is dynamic and I am not sure what exactly will be the value here, I can again use a parameter here. So I will say this should be as per the action parameter first name, or this should be the first name action parameter, and it will verify the value of the first name action parameter. Here I will save this, and all the other options are as we have seen for the get request, all these things are same. I will click on save here, and this has again added two statements. The first statement is to invoke the API request, and the second statement is for verification. Also, if you see here, we have option to go and edit the header URL, headers, the payload. You can directly go to the payload body and edit from here, then response verification. So I can now test this and check. So I will run this on my local agent. So this is all running fine, and you can also see here we are also able to verify the value in the create user API. So this was an example of get and post request, and also an example of how to chain the response and request in a API. So this was an example of a get and post request, and also we have seen how do we do the chaining between these requests. Now let me very quickly create an example for a put request. I will again go to API, select REST from here, and then here I will select a put request. So put is for updating a resource on the server, and again we have a payload as well here. So I will copy the URL and say this is update user in the reference name, give the endpoint URL here, select the method as put, and I can add the headers. I do not need any headers for this particular API, so I will go here and now I will add the payload, which is this request body. And if I go to the outline, again I can do the referencing or add parameters, but for this particular request I will leave it as it is. I will click on send request, and I have got the response. I can do the verification on status code. So I will say add verification on status code and save it. And then if I go to the headers, we have these headers. I will go to the response, and if I want I can add verification for response values as well. So let me just add a verification for this value, that is the name, and I will say save, and this has added. Again we have two statements for invoking the API and then doing the verifications. I will also add another API for delete, so I will create another REST request, and here I am going to take a delete request, and this is the URI. I'll copy the URI, and in the reference name I will say this is delete user. I will give the URL, the method delete, and next. And here I do not have any body. I will just click on send request, and in the response I will check the status. So we do not have any response for a delete, we only have status here, and status is 204, which is a status for no resource or no content. I will add a verification for this. Now if I save this, we will have the statements created for this delete as well. So this is now here. Now I will check, I will run and test these requests, and let us see the output now. And this is now in progress, and now it has executed and everything is fine, everything is running fine. Now I have created and added all my requests. I can also add it to a scenario. I can just say step number 9 will be to add to scenario. It will be as per your needs. I will go and create a scenario. I can go to the scenario from here, or I can directly go from here and click on scenario. I will say this is test APIs, or you can give any scenario name, and description and text are optional. I will say save and continue, and here I will now say add steps. And here we have a option create scenario with library or API steps. So I will click here, and here it will show us the contexts. So I am going to just get this action from this context, REST API testing, and you can see it is added here. And now I can run this scenario. So I can select the agents and other properties from here, and I can run the scenario from here. So this was a very quick example on how you can start with REST API testing in AccelQ. I will have some more examples of API testing, and we will also see SOAP API testing in the coming sessions. I hope this session was very useful for you. Thank you for watching.